So Peter, as you watch that video again, probably for the 2 or 3 dozenth time, I'm guessing, what emotion comes up for you as co-proprietor, and obviously your life history is in that video?
Well, really, it's a sense of pride, family pride, and just so the gratitude towards my grandparents who had the foresight to move to California, get involved with the wine business, and purchase Charles Krug Winery back in the 1940s. And my brother and I, Mark and myself, third generation, moving it forward, and then passed it on to the fourth generation as well. Just an incredible pride, as I mentioned, keeping it in the family and as robust as it is.
Excellent, excellent. Now, about 3 years ago or so, the family made the decision to bring in Judd, the non-family CEO and president of the company. Can you walk me through that process a little bit that led you into that decision to bring in the non-family CEO, and then maybe talk a little bit about how this guy Judd's working out for you?
Yeah, yeah, it's part of a bigger strategy, a process, and part of it was brought about by the G4, coming of age and getting more engaged in the winery and the operations and the business aspect of it, and we needed to put a governance structure in place that would support both the third and the fourth generation, the transition there. And it started with a independent board of directors. So we created a formal board of directors comprised of both family and independent non-family outsiders. And from there, built up the structure of bringing Judd in as a non-family CEO president, and then Judd developing the executive leadership team, VLT, into a very cohesive group. And now what that has brought about is really a unified voice from the family to our employees, to our business partners, our distributors. And that's been very, very important and beneficial.
Excellent. Thank you. Judd, tell me a little bit about how business was going pre-March. So obviously we know mid-March, the dates are questionable, 15, 16, 17, depending on who you are and where you are. We've basically shut down as a world, not just as a country. Tell me how things were going for Charles Krug Winery up to that, and then maybe just ease us a little bit into how things are going since.
Yeah, be glad to. Honestly, before COVID, the crisis started, business was already pretty tough. The industry as a whole had been going through a lot of challenges. One of the biggest challenges has been that the baby boomer population, us, we're really the buyers of all the wine, and we're making this generational change into now the millennials, and it's a huge generation, right? And they're in that stage of their life where they're not drinking; they're experimenting with everything. But so we had generational change. We had a big boom in the craft spirits business, particularly the like craft bourbons and things like that.
Sure. Craft
beers. Cannabis is, supposedly the big threat and things like that. There's an excess of worldwide grapes, so there's a sort of a quote unquote glut of grapes that are out there. But to be honest with you, it's nothing that the wine industry hasn't seen before, and I haven't seen before, in fact, several times. And one of the things that I love about the wine industry is, remember, the wine industry's been around for 8,000 years.
Yeah.
So there's some history there. And we've survived for pretty much everything that you can think of. I mean, think about prohibition, in the 30s. I mean, that's what could be more devastating than that. Well, consumption actually went up then. So I guess it was, talk about lemonades.
So they can't do something, they do more of it, right?
Yeah. So we see a steady climb in the industry over the last, at least 40 years to a per capita consumption that is still minuscule compared to the rest of the world. So the upside for our industry is really high.
Yeah. Thank you. Peter, how did moving the kind of the day-to-day decision-making, if you will, to the executive leadership team or the non-family, executive team, how does that made you respond maybe quicker or more robustly to this pandemic that we're in now, if it's had an effect at all?
Well, I think the governance that we have in place is very well defined. We have a unifying voice starting with Judd, again, as I mentioned before, talking to our employees and our business partners out there. And I think it's very, very important to have that unifying voice. So you don't have, multiple comments or thoughts coming from different family members. That's very important. And I think this structure is in hindsight, is very good for the current situation.
Could either of you talk a little bit about how the communication process, excuse me, and the decision-making process, not necessarily going back in history or going forward, but in this time, in this crisis that we're in now, what's the daily communication like? What's the overall, maybe Judd, I'll start with you.
Sure.
In being the CEO of a non-family company, which a lot of people listening today are in that role. I know I work with a lot of non-family executives in family business. Has the communication changed at all because of the pandemic, and how so?
Yeah, actually, it's one of the benefits that's come out of this. Frankly, we've got 122 employees, and they're spread out across the country. Vast majority of them are here in Napa, but the sales force is all across the country, and people in different areas of work. Some vineyards, out in the vineyards, production, et cetera, et cetera. And what we did is we wanted to have a unifying voice, but in this particular case, I took the head of our human resources to be that one voice, and on a daily basis, she would send out basically a COVID update, and that would go out to the whole company, to the family, board of directors, et cetera, et cetera. And then every morning at 9 o'clock, that ELT, that executive leadership team, we have a powwow every morning at 9 o'clock, just like we're doing right now. It's all a Zoom meeting,
Sure.
And we go over the activities of the day, what we need to be doing, how I can help. I think that's my biggest job, is how I can be of service to each one of my management team, as they go forward for the day. About every 2 weeks, I put out a much more in-depth overview of what's been going on to the whole company. And then on a monthly basis, my CFO puts out a very in-depth financial output to the board of directors and family. And then, of course, we have our quarterly board of directors meetings, which are regularly scheduled.
Sure. And that involves some members of the family and some non-members of
Exactly.
the board, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly. It should, I should point out too that Mark and Peter, it's not like Mark and Peter are absentee owners.
Of course.
They're in the office all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
outside of this situation.
Well, so much so that in my early involvement with Peter, as we were planning for our Hall of Fame event and discussions, until he sent me an email 3 weeks ago, I didn't even know there was a non-family CEO and president. And that's not a knock on you. That's how involved he is, because all the discussions and conversations about the winery, about the business, and about the family all went through Peter. So kudos to the organization for having that real seamless transition. I like that a lot. Peter, what would you say have been some of the challenging aspects that the family or the organization has faced during this pandemic? We're not going to make the whole discussion about the pandemic, but certainly the reason we created this summit is that we are all in unprecedented, to use that word we all use every day, unprecedented times.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the issues that the family struggles with, and not just during the COVID, but even before, with this governance transition, which the family is completely on board with, but historically, and the family's been involved for over 75 years and 3 generations in this family business, we've been extremely hands-on family with all aspects of the operations. And we are now transitioning to get away from extract ourselves from the day-to-day aspects of the operations. We're still heavily involved in the strategic direction, the overall direction, but removing ourselves from the day-to-day aspects of the operations and relying on and passing that on to Judd and the ELT, and to a certain degree, I guess, the board. So that's still an ongoing transition for the family to kind of extract ourselves from that day-to-day hands-on aspect of it. And hopefully, Judd, we're doing okay at that.
You're teeing up the next question.
Yeah,
perfect.
We always have room for improvement with that aspect, but that's an ongoing thing. And because during the Great Recession, we were much more actively involved in the tactical aspect of it. Now we're more informed on that aspect, but involved with the strategic aspect.
Yeah, And that is a perfect segue into what I wanted to ask you next, Judd. And you've been coached on my questions here a little bit going in, but not completely. I'd like to hear your take, again, going back to how we might be able to assist other families that are in a similar situation. A lot of families have, as I mentioned before, the non-family executive in the corner office, so to speak, president, CEO role, the family, like the Mondavi family that's actively involved. Then you have that board, which is kind of a combination thereof. What would you, I'll get to the advice question a little bit later, but right now, what would you say really works in that structure for you? I know both of you have touched on it a little bit, but could you go a little deeper into how that really works well for you?
Yeah, well, I think it's just like it's just like the government. It's checks and balances. You've got these three groups: family, board, and management that work together, and they have to be working together to move forward. I think it's very important from my standpoint. I think it's very important for executives who work for family companies like this to know what the goal is of the company. You know, in the wine industry, we've read and seen about a lot of acquisitions. People are selling out, whatever it happens to be. It was very clear coming into this position that that was not even remotely on the radar for the Mondavis. And that gave me all the direction I needed, you know, to say, okay, that means what we're trying to do here is we're trying to grow a sustainable business that's going to last generations. What do we need to do to make that happen? And that's what that's just that simple direction makes it pretty obvious where we need to go. And that is really through growth with lockstep with the board and the family all working together. And the family, you know, this is the first family of American wine. This is the Mondavis.
Yeah.
They're pretty, I don't want to call them a tool, but they're really good tools to use.
Yeah, it's a good name to have on your shirt, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah, I was watching 60 Minutes the other night, and they were doing a feature on the farms, especially in the central part of our country, and how it's really been a tough time. It was a tough time prior to the COVID crisis,
right,
in a lot of the farming areas. One of the things that really struck me, and I'm going to go back to you, Judd, on you for a second. I hadn't prepared you for this question, but I know you'll do fine. One of the concerns that some of these generations that are running these farms today, concern that they have is, you know, this family business has been around for 3 or 4 generations. In your case, you got 75 years of history behind you. I mean, literally behind you in that farm. You've told me in previous conversations, you're not in the wine business, you're in the farming and real estate. And your wine is what you make, but really farming and real estate. How does that, I'm not going to use the word pressure, because I get that you're not feeling pressure from it, because Peter and his family don't strike me as the type that would put that necessarily on, but certainly history can apply pressure to us, regardless of who the people are. Do you think about that much at all in this time of, you know, gosh, there's 75 years of history? Just if that thought process comes across, how do you cope with that?
Yeah, you know, it's our VP of sales has a great analogy, and his line on this is he goes, "There's a reason why the rearview mirror is smaller than the windshield." You know, you really do need to take a, you know, have your eye on behind you. You want to see what's going on, and you want to pay tribute to the past. But everything I'm involved with and what our team is all about is moving forward. And how can we move forward? I'll be honest with you, I don't really think about pressure from the family at all.
Yeah.
I think that the team and myself included, we all bring a whole bunch of different skill sets and experiences that the family have not experienced. And you combine, you know, sort of their history and their knowledge, the intimate knowledge of what's going on with this outsider's knowledge from other companies, and you end up with the best practices. And I think that from my standpoint, I don't feel any pressure at all, family-wise.
Awesome. Peter, I'm going to jump to a different question too. What would you say to a family business that's in your situation now that maybe you were in a few years ago, where you were considering making this move to an outside executive leadership team, or an outside, you know, involving more outsiders in the board, or even bringing in an outside CEO? What advice would you give? What steps did you take, I guess, that worked, and maybe what steps did you and your brother take that maybe didn't work so well?
Well, first, we started with an advisory board, because prior to that, we had basically a family board that just kind of stamped stuff, and that was it,
Sure.
just to have, you know, the legal stuff checked off. So we moved to an advisory board, which gave us a little bit of experience in that. So they had no fiduciary responsibilities at all, just more advice. And we did that for about a year. And through that process, I think became a little more comfortable with the transition to a formal board of directors. And so then we moved to a formal board. None of the advisors transitioned to the formal board. And I think that was kind of defined at the onset of the advisory board. Yeah. So we went to the board, and I think in our situation, first of all, let me tell you, there's no, in a family business, there's no single, silver bullet here.
Right.
Yeah. Everyone
your way is everything for everyone, right?
Yeah, there's a multitude of different solutions to the family business. So we moved to a board of directors was initially dominated by outside independents. And then the family felt it more appropriate after a couple of years to have a family dominance. So now there's 4 family members and 3 non-family. Judd is one of those, and we have 2 independent outside directors as well. So in our situation, I think it was appropriate to have dominant family on the board as far from a voting standpoint. Others may want dominant independents. Some have exclusively independents. Some have all family. It's really just depends. But that's what worked for us. And then from there, really evolved into not defining the leadership team, but bringing Judd on board, and then having Judd define the leadership team.
How did the 2 of you work on succession planning? I mean, obviously, there is the succession plan right now, and maybe you don't know, but is it to keep who's following in your footsteps, for example, Judd? Do you have that person in mind, or?
Yeah, remember one of our meetings that we had, the gentleman from WD-40.
Jerry Ridge, right?
They like to call it bench strength.
Yeah,
which I really like that, building your bench. So I'm using that now. I'm completely stealing it from him.
Yeah, so actually in that way, actually, yeah.
Yeah, in every aspect of the company, we've got bench strength. It's part of our planning. I think without bench strength, you're really exposing yourself. And so, yeah, I definitely have. I'll tell you that the truth is I have sort of twofold approach to this. One is to have my replacement, if need be. But the other side of it is I don't believe that this company will always be, it's not a mandate to say it has to have outside management.
Right.
So if there is a generation 5 or a generation 6 or whatever that comes along that is qualified and has the experience and has the leadership skills to run this company, then it should be a Mondavi. Mm-hmm. I think that would be awesome. We use the example. In fact, Peter talked about it in the video of great estate, and that's really our aspiration, is to be recognized and respected as one of the great estates of the world. And we use a model a lot. That's the Antinori family in Italy. There's not a whole lot of multi-generational companies particularly 4 generations in the wine industry or in any industry in America, right? So we look to the great estates of Europe. The Antinoris are in their 26th generation of Antinoris. So if it's an Antinori woman who is the CEO. So if ever there was a company that would be aspiring towards, that would be it.
You can look to them as a benchmark, certainly, of how they've done it for 26 generations. Yeah. Pretty amazing. Our time is short here, and this is, it's hard to do this in 20 minutes, and we will have a Q&A after this as well, live, when we air this on the 20th. And so there's a couple more questions that I may reserve the right to ask in that Q&A. We'll give it to the audience, obviously, as well. But one of the questions that I have is, how has this pandemic that we're in now, so again, the theme and the topic of our summit today is it's a lemonade summit, making lemonade out of lemons. Let me give each of you a chance to answer that question before we wrap up. I guess, Judd, I'll start with you, and then Peter, being the Mondavi on the screen, we'll give you a chance for the final word.
Okay.
Judd, if you could answer how the organization has taken these lemons that we've been dealt and turned them into lemonade. I almost wanted to use the old, taking, sour grapes and turning them into sweet wine. That would probably be too cliche, but I had to get that in. But how would you say that the organization has done that?
Yeah, it's obviously nobody expected any of this, but I think the first part of it is having the right team in place that's ready to go. I mean, we embrace this. this whole team is just kind of going, great, what do we need to do? How do we turn this around? What do we need to do? We're not going to rest. And so I think in many ways we've already made lemonade. My DTC is the direct to consumer part of it, which is the tasting room and things like that. Well, it's closed. So what do I do with that staff? And what do we need to do to compensate for that lost revenue? Well, we immediately, spun on it and started doing a lot of telephone work, a lot of email work, a lot of Zoom tastings, a lot of Facebook Live events, and frankly, you know what, we haven't skipped a beat. And this is sort of new news because we just did it yesterday. We had anticipated that our last club run would be dramatically short of our plan. Why? Because probably a lot of people have lost their jobs and can't really afford to be in wine clubs anymore, right?
Sure.
We actually exceeded our original plan with the club run. And there's still lots of activity to be done on top of that. Our sales force is out there getting to know their customers better. We work through a 3-tier system, a distributor, and now our sales force is instead of working through the distributor, they're working directly with their customers. And now we've got a better relationship with our customers. So it's been, really phenomenal to have a team that isn't going to just sit back and wait for things to happen. We're going out and actively taking market share.
Yeah, I found that to be the case for me too. I'm sure that I think with you in the past and with others as well, is that this technology and this opportunity, and I'm going to call it an opportunity, has really helped me get closer to the two of you, obviously, and to many others, because we're face to face. There really isn't any nonverbal now. We're looking at each other, we're talking to each other, we're getting to know each other. And if there's a lemonade for me on this, it's certainly been the fact that I've gotten closer to a lot of people. Peter, your final word, anything you want to touch on as far as the impact or advice you might give to maybe leaders out there? 2-part question, I guess. How has this turned into lemonade for you? And then finally, if you could give any words of wisdom to leaders that may be struggling through this pandemic, what might you say?
Well, first of all, I think through the board and hiring of Judd, and then Judd's formation of the ELT, we, prior to all this, not with the knowledge of this happening, Judd's created a very, very cohesive group with a lot of bench strength across the board, a lot of experience, and they've demonstrated how incredibly nimble they could be. I mean, the actions they took, Judd gave the example of DTC and the success there, have been remarkable, and with little guidance from the board. Board's in there a little more as an oversight, but the ELT has really stepped up, really been agile, and been able to make lemonade out of the lemons we were delivered.
Sure. Excellent. Any parting advice if anybody's out there? I know we have leaders watching today that are just scrambling, and that maybe they don't have that solid leadership person in place, or maybe they don't have an industry that hasn't. I mean, you guys have been impacted, but there are some out there that have just been wiped out.
Yeah, we're fortunate in our business here, in the wine business, being agriculturally based, is considered an essential business, and because we supply grocery stores, so that has clearly helped us. There's a lot of industries that have been just completely shuttered during this, but let's look at the light at the end of the tunnel. We will get through this. We've gotten through a lot of other difficult times in the past.
We're making it through. So, well, Peter and Judd, I could spend a lot more time with each of you out of respect for your schedule and the schedule of our audience who's watching today. I want to thank you both. I look forward to the Q&A, which will come up after this, and we'll do that live here in a little bit. But thank you so much for taking the time and for your support of what we're doing for family businesses. Ultimately, as you know, family businesses are the backbone of our country. And you guys are a prime example of that. So I want to express my gratitude for you and to you, and just wish you the best of luck as we round the corner, hopefully, and start turning, things better as we go forward in this pandemic. And I won't say get back to business as usual, because that doesn't exist anymore. Whatever the new usual looks like, I'm excited to watch your progress on that too. So thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Ed, thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity.
Our pleasure.